Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Chris Barber, one of the Freedom Convoy protesters, took to the stand today at the public inquiry into the Emergencies Act. You'll hear some of his testimony. Political reporter Brian Lilly says Ottawa police should have known that protesters were going to stay longer than just a couple of days. He will explain. And we hear from a Lethbridge actor, Owen Crowshoe, who recently worked on a Kevin Costner Western movie called Horizon.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. One of the Freedom Convoy organizers, Chris Barber, says the protest in Ottawa last February was supposed to be a way to get the federal government to listen to truck drivers' concerns about cross-border COVID-19 vaccine mandates. Truck driver Chris Barber was one of the first several organizers to take the stand at the public inquiry investigating Ottawa's invocation of the Emergencies Act. Barber explained how the COVID-19 mandates affected him personally as a trucker.
We lost a lot of drivers. What freight I can't handle myself for my company, I share with other fellow drivers and other company owners. We lost, the government likes to say 10% of cross-border drivers. I didn't see that. I seen it more 35 to 40%. We lost a lot of drivers.
Now, within 2 weeks of planning the convoy, thousands of trucks and protesters descended on downtown Ottawa, where city streets were blocked for close to a month. Eva Chipyuk is a lawyer with the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms. She's in Ottawa representing the protesters who participated in the Freedom Convoy. Evan, it's a pretty big week with a number of protesters being called to testify at the public inquiry. What do you think we'll learn from this?
Finally, the truth, really, after a couple weeks of hearsay and she said, he said, evidence, we're really hearing the real story from some of the protesters that we've heard a lot about, but now we get to hear their story and their side of what happened in Ottawa.
Now, from what we have heard so far with the testimonies from police and now from some of the convoy organizers, what do you think the reaction will be from the majority of Canadians who are watching this?
Well, I really hope that they finally see the truth about what occurred. And, you know, even that word, I've always had such a hard time with it, convoy organizers. As you heard today from Chris Barber, there was next to no organization. It was just Canadians coming together with a common cause, working together, doing what they could in kind of a humanitarian effort. They came here to Ottawa. We heard the words, they were abandoned by the police. And then just regular Canadians came together to help each other out. And that's the real story of what happened in Ottawa in February.
Thanks so much, Eva. That was Eva Chipyuk, lawyer with the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms, joining us from the public inquiry into the Emergencies Act in Ottawa. Political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilly has been following the public inquiry into the Emergencies Act. Lilly says the police in Ottawa should have known that the truckers and protesters were going to be staying longer than just a couple of days.
How disorganized they were, how ill-prepared they were. All they had to do was take in any media reporting on the convoy, watch their Facebook posts, and you would have known that they were coming for a long time. Read the intelligence reports prepared by the Ontario Provincial Police. They didn't do that. They did not realize that they were coming. They did not believe that they were coming for more than 2 days. And to hear senior officer after senior officer say that, but then also see the evidence that they were warned, sometimes weeks ahead of time, what was actually going to happen, and that they just didn't do anything, it is quite shocking.
Mr. Lilly will have more on the public inquiry into the Emergencies Act coming up after business news. The Canadian government has announced plans to dramatically boost immigration heading into the year 2025. The Trudeau Liberals are setting a goal of bringing in 500,000 newcomers each year. Immigration Minister Sean Fraser says the move is necessary to ensure Canada's economic prosperity.
You know, Canada has experienced one of the strongest economic recoveries from the COVID-19 pandemic. We've recovered significantly more jobs than were lost during the pandemic. Our GDP levels are well in excess of pre-pandemic levels. A couple of months ago, we hit the lowest rate of unemployment in the history of Canada. Yet still, there's challenges. Life's been getting more expensive. It's driving up the cost of building projects, and it's hard to find workers. The reality is you don't need to dig into the stats to understand that there was a million jobs available in the Canadian economy. You need to walk down Main Street of any community in Canada. You're going to see help wanted signs in the window.
Minister Fraser says the new plan puts an emphasis on increasing the number of immigrants who will be admitted based on their work skills or experience. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says all politicians should be concerned about Ontario's decision to invoke the notwithstanding clause to stop any legal challenges over imposing a contract on 55,000 education workers. Justice Minister David Lametti and Labour Minister Seamus O'Regan say they're discussing what the federal government can do about it.
The use of the notwithstanding clause is very serious. It de facto means that people's rights are being infringed, and it's being justified using the notwithstanding clause. And using it preemptively is exceedingly problematic. It cuts off both political debate and judicial scrutiny.
It's a travesty. And I think what I find particularly offensive about it is just the cavalier manner in which it's used. It's an affront to democracy. I mean, the notwithstanding clause is meant to be used in the most extreme of circumstances. Workers have a freedom to strike. Workers have a right to strike. It is fundamental, and it is protected by the Charter. And any time those rights and freedoms are threatened, that is a very serious matter.
Well, those warm 15-degree days may be officially behind us here in Lethbridge. Angela Stewart is in with an early peek at the forecast. Angela, not only will it be cooler, but we could also see snow mixed with rain?
Yeah, Hal, you're not wrong. Those warm, sunny 20-degree days are behind us, and the snow has officially set in. We can expect to see about 5 centimeters tonight in the forecast and a low of near -3. Tomorrow, expecting even more snow, about 10 centimeters, and a low of near -4 with a wind chill of -13. As for how the rest of the week is shaping up, I'll have all those details coming up later in the show.
Thanks so much, Angela. The Royal Canadian Legion announced that this year's National Silver Cross Mother is Candy Greff of Lacombe, Alberta. She will have the honour of placing a wreath at the National War Memorial in Ottawa on Remembrance Day. Greff will remain in her national role until October of next year. Her son, Master Corporal Byron Greff, was a member of the 3rd Battalion of the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry based in Edmonton. He was a highly skilled soldier who tragically lost his life in Afghanistan on October 29th of 2011. He was riding inside of an armoured NATO bus when a suicide bomber detonated an explosives-filled car, which impacted the bus. The National Silver Cross Mother acts on behalf of all Canadian moms who've lost either son or daughter in the line of service. Residents of Kyiv, Ukraine lined up for hours today to try and get some water after Russian strikes knocked out power and water supplies to their region.
You have imagined that your life will change in incorrect way. For example, you have not water, you are afraid that you will not have a gas, that you will have not light, for example, because a half of Kyiv now without light and water. And how do you understand how it will impact your life?
Seated at the dinner table with his wife Olena in a village outside of Kyiv, Yaroslav cannot count the number of times they've eaten in the dark since Russian attacks triggered the blackouts beginning in early October.
It gets okay when you get used to it. When you are not able to plan for 8 months anything more than a week ahead.
Is there anything that you have had to deal with?
We get as much as we need immediately from Russia.
Oh.
Bingo!
You could not.
I couldn't have done that better myself.
Police are still investigating what caused a crowd surge that killed more than 150 people, including 26 foreigners, during a big Halloween bash in Seoul. Many of the victims were in their 20s, and most of the victims were women. There are also more than 100 people who were injured during the stampede. Police say there were around 100,000 revelers in the area celebrating the first outdoor no-mask Halloween event since the pandemic. Closer to home, Lethbridge police need help finding a robbery suspect. Police say during the late-night hours on September 25th, a 17-year-old male was walking in the area of 13th Street and 3rd Avenue South when he was followed into an alley by an unknown male and female. The male then assaulted the youth, stealing various items from him. The male and female then fled the scene on foot. The youth returned home and then was taken to hospital where he was treated for non-life-threatening injuries. Now, police released a composite sketch of the male suspect. If you know who this is or have more information about the robbery, you're asked to call Lethbridge Police right away or Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-8477. Alberta Justice Minister Tyler Shandro has responded to last week's declaration by the Supreme Court of Canada that a 2011 change to the Criminal Code requiring sex offenders to automatically be added to the Sex Offenders Registry is unconstitutional. The court found that criminal statutes violate Section 7 of Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Shandro released a statement which said, "The Supreme Court's decision will make our country a more dangerous place. The decision to end automatic registration on the Sex Offender Registry will make it harder to ensure that these crimes are not reported." According to Shandro, the database provided law enforcement an effective tool helping to monitor sexual offenders in our communities. With the announcement of a new agreement regarding doctor compensation in British Columbia, Alberta NDP leader Rachel Notley says the Smith government in Alberta needs to take urgent action to keep family doctors from leaving our province. The BC government announced an agreement with doctors that will significantly increase their compensation.
Smith has promised that the first 90 days of her healthcare plan will be quote-unquote bumpy. And I would argue that this government and many of the people sitting in her new cabinet have already run our healthcare system not onto a bumpy road, but right off the road. Smith leans on conspiracy theories about health and medicine, ignoring the advice of Alberta healthcare workers, which has damaged even further this government's relationship with healthcare workers. Smith blamed healthcare workers for manufacturing what she claimed to be non-existent staff shortages. Imagine that. Making claims as ridiculous and unfounded as this after all of the horrific stories that we have actually seen unfold in front of us.
On September 29th, Alberta doctors voted 70% in favor of a new $252 million four-year deal that includes modest pay increases. Now here's a follow-up to a story we brought you last week about disability support workers frustrated about not seeing a wage increase for the last 8 years. A worker in Lethbridge says the lack of pay and staffing shortages is having a direct effect on their clients.
Really affects our individuals. Our individuals, we're seeing a ton of anxiety and frustration and trust issues because they're having people come in and out of their lives like a revolving door. You know, they just start, one of the big things with working in this field is building connections with others, building rapport. And how can you build that rapport when you're not sure who's going to be hanging out with you tomorrow morning? You know? So it's a universal challenge. Like I have coworkers now that are working 3 jobs.
Lyons says they would like to see a permanent change, including a pay increase of around 18%, along with more staff members. A new Kevin Costner movie is in production in our province. The Western-themed film is called Horizon. It takes place during the pre- and post-Civil War expansion and settlement of the American West. A local Indigenous actor has recently joined the cast. Video journalist Micah Quinn has more now on Owen Crowshoe and his journey to the top. Crowshoe said he fell in love with acting after his father brought him on set of a TV series.
When I very first got on set, I was blown away by everything. I was like taking in everything that was around me.
Owen Crowshoe has a laundry list of acting credits on his resume. He has worked on The Revenant, Black Summer, Tin Star, and Joe Pickett, just to name a few. If that wasn't nearly enough, he has joined an ensemble cast of actors for the upcoming movie Horizon, which stars Kevin Costner, Sienna Miller, and Sam Worthington. Crowshoe is originally from Lethbridge and grew up on the Piikani Nation. He got his start in acting when he was just 20 years old.
My dad he kind of stepped up. He said, he was like, well, if you don't want to play football, he said you could come back home with me and I'm doing some horse riding on this show, Hell on Wheels. And I kind of thought about it. I was like, hey, that sounds fun now. Like now at the stage of my life I was at, I was like, yeah, that sounds like something interesting.
Keep Alberta Rolling is a non-profit organization that promotes the economic and community-orientated benefits of the big screen in Alberta. Brock Skredding, the head of advocacy with the group, says it's amazing to see actors from Alberta working in big blockbuster movies and putting our province on the map.
It really shows how much talent we have have in Southwest Alberta, and how amazing it is to see as the industry grows its footprint here in the province. We're also seeing local talent get opportunities internationally and really share their talent with the world. So that's awesome to see.
The filming for Horizon is set to wrap sometime in November, and so far, nothing has been confirmed regarding a release date for the movie. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
That's pretty cool. The Lethbridge and District exhibition won a very prestigious award. The Chamber of Commerce recently hosted their Lethbridge Business Awards, and the exhibition took home the Spirit of Reconciliation Prize. It's for the work they did along with the Blackfoot Confederacy during the powwow and princess pageant at Whoop Up Days earlier this summer. Mike Workington, the CEO of the exhibition, says it was a real honor to take home this award and continue to work toward reconciliation here in our community.
We often talk about how Lethbridge is a community surrounded by some of the biggest reservations in the country and some of the largest Indigenous populations in the country. And the reality is that's true if you look at a map. What our hope for our programming is that we are a community gathering place that promotes one community inclusive of Indigenous and Blackfoot people. And we're not talking about a community that's flanked by reservations. We're one community here in Southern Alberta that is inclusive of our Indigenous people.
Workington says there was $65,000 worth of prize money for powwow contestants, and around 200 dance contestants competed during the event. The Lethbridge College Kodiaks women's soccer team earned bronze over the weekend at the ACAC Championships. Now, they fell a little short of their goal of heading to the Nationals this year. This is the third year the women's team has walked away with the bronze. Head coach Sean Casey says the team tried really hard, but just couldn't come out on top.
We pushed Red Deer really hard on Saturday in the semi-final, just couldn't get that tying goal near the end there. And, but then you have to regroup, and you still have an opportunity to win a medal at a conference championships, which is huge. So we just reiterated that with the girls. This is still a major deal for the college and for the city of Lethbridge. Hopefully, bringing those kind of medals back is definitely something we're proud of. And hopefully next year's our year now.
The Kodiaks won the bronze medal by defeating the Nate Ooks 2-0 on Sunday. Congratulations, girls. By the way, Red Deer Polytechnique won the gold, defeating Concordia University of Edmonton Thunder 1-0. Well, it's felt more like hockey than soccer weather right now, and it may be a good idea to have a snow shovel and snow brush handy if you live here in southwestern Alberta. More of the white stuff is on the way. Full weather details are on deck. Well, the mercury has dropped by quite a bit over the last couple of days here in southwestern Alberta. Angela Stewart is out in the field at Lethbridge City Hall. Angela, not only is it getting colder, but we're seeing a little bit of moisture in the form of snow and rain.
Yeah, how the colder and wetter temperatures have set in for our region. We can expect to see about 5 centimeters of snow in the forecast tonight with a wind chill of -9 overnight. Make sure to have that snow brush handy tomorrow. About 10 centimeters of flurries is expected for Wednesday with a northwest wind gusting to 50 km. The temperature will remain steady near -4. The wind chill, though, reaching about -13. Thursday climbing up to +1 and sunny. Friday up to 6 degrees and sunny skies. Saturday periods of snow and a high of 0. Sunday dropping to -11 with a chance of snow once again. The average high for this time of year is 8 degrees. -3 is the average low. Back in 1947, we reached our highest temperature, which was a beautiful double-digit temperatures, 21 degrees. -26 was our lowest temperature recorded back in 1984. This morning, the sun rose at 8:20 and it set at 6:10, giving us just about 9 hours and 15 minutes of daylight. When we look at temperatures across the country now for Wednesday, Victoria expects showers tomorrow, about a 40% chance with cloudy conditions. Vancouver, double-digit temperatures, 10 degrees and clearing. Do expect some light winds gusting to about 30 km near the water in the late afternoon. Edmonton -3, about 5 centimeters of snow with winds gusting to 50 km. The wind chill is expected to reach about -11. There's also a snowfall warning in Calgary, snow at times heavy, ending in the afternoon, reaching a high of -5. Looking to the rest of the prairies now, Saskatoon with a high of +1, snow mixed with rain. There is a risk of freezing rain in the morning, 8 degrees and sunny in Regina tomorrow. Looking at Winnipeg there, +18 and a mix of sun and cloud. To the central part of the country in Toronto now, mainly sunny and 14 for tomorrow. Our nation's capital, Ottawa, 15 and sunny skies. Montreal, same picture, 15 for the high and sunny. Fredericton, sunny and plus 13 for Wednesday. Halifax, expect some winds, sunny skies, and a high of 14. Charlottetown, a high of 12 and sunny. And St. John's, periods of rain and 12 degrees. And that's a look at the forecast from outside City Hall here in Lethbridge.
Are you tired of high energy bills? Today's weather report is brought to you by Ridge Utilities, providing competitive rates for electricity, natural gas, and internet while investing back in communities across southern Alberta.
Molson Coors says its third quarter profit fell to just over $216 million US. Now that compares to $453 million a year earlier. The Montreal-based brewer says its net income dropped despite higher sales as it faced increased costs. It says net sales for the quarter totaled $2.94 billion. That's up from $2.82 billion in the third quarter of 2021. According to financial markets data firm Refinitiv, that beat analysts' expectations of $2.89 billion. Shares of Uber are surging after the company said there is little evidence that North Americans are pulling back on hailing rides or ordering food deliveries despite soaring inflation. The San Francisco-based company says it expects fourth quarter gross bookings to rise between 23% and 27% from last year. In the most recent quarter, gross bookings increased 26% to $29.1 billion. Shares of Uber had been down almost 30% this year, but jumped 15% on the news. More snow and cooler weather just around the corner. That usually means higher energy prices, including electricity. Trevor Lewington is the mayor of Sterling, Alberta, but he's also a spokesperson with Ridge Utilities. Trevor says if Albertans want to save on electrical costs or to not have to pay anything at all, they should seriously consider more solar panels.
There's also renewable energy credits that you can get as a micro generator. So for example, I have solar panels on my home. In the village of Sterling, we're a net zero community. We have rooftop solar units as well as a ground mount array that generates enough electrical power to offset what we use. And I can certainly use myself as the example. You know, I haven't paid a power bill since February because I'm essentially generating my own revenue. And I probably will be able to get away with most of the winter not paying another bill because of the credits that I've saved up. And for our community, for the little village of Sterling, it's made a huge difference to be net zero. It actually is a revenue source for us. So rather than paying power bills, we're actually getting paid to generate power, which is an important thing for our residents. It keeps our budget pretty neutral.
Mr. Lewington will have more energy-saving tips for us coming up after business news. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 91 points on the day to finish at 19,517. The Dow was down 79 points to 32,653. The S&P 500 was down 15 on the day to 3856, and the Nasdaq was down 97 points to 10,890. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 201 to 88.54 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 54 cents to 5.82 US. Gold was down 2 cents to 16.4797 US an ounce, and silver was even on the day at 19.63 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $12.90 per bushel, barley's at $9.90, canola's at $20.09, and corn is at $12.11 per bushel. Live cattle were down 53 cents to 151.95. Feeder cattle were down 70 cents to 176.93, and lean hogs were up 28 cents to 85.20. The Canadian dollar was even over the past 24 hours at 73.37 US. Recapping one of our top stories, the Royal Canadian Legion announced that this year's National Silver Cross Mother is Candy Greff of Lacombe, Alberta. She will have the honour of placing a wreath at the National War Memorial in Ottawa on Remembrance Day. Greff will remain in her national role until October of next year. Her son, Master Corporal Byron Greff, was a member of the 3rd Battalion of the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry based in Edmonton. He was a highly skilled soldier who tragically lost his life in Afghanistan on October 29th of 2011. The public inquiry into the Emergencies Act continues in Ottawa. We have the latest from political reporter Brian Lilly in just a moment. Listen, if you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. We'd love to hear from you.
Here's today's Bridge City News Community Calendar. The Lethbridge Senior Citizens Organization is looking for volunteers to take part in their Drive Happiness program. This program is to help seniors in our community who are facing extreme loneliness due to lack of accessible transportation. Volunteers drive clients to their medical appointments, pick up groceries, and take them to important life activities. If you're interested in this opportunity and for more information, visit lethseniors.com/volunteer drivers. Lethbridge Legal Guidance is a nonprofit society offering free legal advice to low-income Southern Albertans. It holds clinics on Tuesdays from 4 to 6 p.m. by appointment only. Some of the areas the society assists in include family, criminal, traffic, immigration, EI, and other issues. For more information, call 403-380-6338 or visit their website, lethbridgelegalguidance.ca. And that's today's Bridge City News Community Calendar.
After a week of mostly hearing from police officials, the public inquiry into the Emergencies Act will now begin hearing from organizers of the Freedom Convoy. Now, to talk about this in more detail is political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilly, who joins us once again from Toronto. Brian, who will we hear from first?
Well, the first organizer that we've heard from so far is Chris Barber from Saskatchewan, who was one of the early organizers. And you're right, we've heard from a lot of police officials over the last week. You know, first week it was residents and city officials, people like Ottawa Mayor Jim Watson, city manager, residents who said they were impacted by the convoy. Then a lot of police officials, current and former Ottawa police officers. We heard from Peter Slowly, the former chief, for two full days of testimony. That's the longest anyone's testified. And now it's on to the organizers. So Chris Barber was up. He spoke with Commission Counsel first. For people who haven't been watching this, there's a lot of different lawyers that can question a witness. Commission Counsel, they're there on behalf of the public inquiry. And their job is to generally introduce the person, introduce any documents that go with them, such as a written report or a summary of their previous interviews. They walk through what you could generally call agreed upon statements of fact. They ask some questions, and then you get into the cross-examination phase. And with Chris Barber, a lot of the groups didn't want to talk to him, but the Government of Canada lawyer did, and that turned out to be pretty interesting.
You know, there were questions about why Chris Barber became part of the Freedom Convoy to begin with. Some asked if there were maybe other political goals or people with ulterior motives who joined the convoy. What did he say?
Well, he said that his goal was always to end the cross-border travel mandates. And, there was a lot of questions about that. How did he get involved? And he got involved because somebody reached out to him and said, I'm going to lose my job over this. And, Chris Barber is someone who's under the old definition, I don't know what the definition is now, but he's someone who would have been considered fully vaccinated. But he said he was fully vaccinated because he runs an independent trucking company, didn't want to lose his ability to go across the border, but saw that he was losing drivers, that people who really didn't want to get vaccinated were at risk of losing their job. So he got involved for that. But there were a lot of questions, both from Commission Counsel, but especially pointed ones from the Government of Canada lawyer about other people getting involved, such as the group Canada Unity. They're the ones who joined on to Freedom Convoy 2022, and they had what they called the Memorandum of Understanding. They were going to replace the government. Well, that's something that Barber said he was never a part of, that the core group behind Freedom Convoy 2022 were not part of. And then a lot of questions about Pat King, because there's always been this claim by some that Pat King was a key organizer, others saying he never had anything to do with it. The truth is somewhere in the middle. Pat King was part of the organizing committee originally, but as we heard in testimony, during the move from Western Canada to Ottawa, somewhere by the time of the Ontario-Manitoba border, he'd been pushed out because Chris Barber, Tamara Leach, and others had serious concerns. They had originally, when they were alerted to some issues about racist comments or violent comments, such as saying the Prime Minister will get a bullet to the head, they approached him. And he always had something to say. But over the following days, they saw more and more evidence and just told him, look, we don't want you as part of this. And at one point told him, we don't think you should go to Ottawa. But they weren't able to stop him or get him out. But he definitely wasn't part of the organizing committee by the end, even if he was at the beginning.
So, Brian, when will we actually hear from Tamara Lich, who many would argue was the main organizer of the Freedom Convoy back in February?
And she's perceived that way, due in part to some of the testimony we heard. Chris Barber took on a different role. Tamara Lich took on the public-facing role. He said to her, I don't want to be in front of the cameras and talking into the microphones at these news conferences. I'll stand beside you, but I don't want that. She took on that role. I would have expected that we would have heard from her by Friday. It's really going to depend on how long some of these witnesses go. Slowly took a lot longer than I thought. They've added more witnesses, which is only going to prolong things. So hopefully by Friday, but it could be early next week if some of these other witnesses do go long.
Brian, do you think we'll also hear during the public inquiry into the Emergencies Act the fact that the Freedom Convoy was not funded by the Russians, like some media outlets were reporting?
I think that has been discussed a little bit already, and that story has been debunked. The part that I could have actually believed, because Russian bot farms for social media accounts jump onto all kinds of causes, and their goal is to destabilize. And if you actually read the reports into Russian interference in the 2016 U.S. election that President Donald Trump won, the official reports don't say that they were trying to get Donald Trump to win. That report said the same thing that Canadian reports have said and other Western countries. They jump in on causes that can do anything to destabilize Western democracies or sow confusion. So I wouldn't be surprised if there were, social media accounts doing that, but it wasn't funded by foreign actors, be it Russians or Americans. And that, unfortunately, is part of the media reporting that went on. And then that media reporting was used to justify invoking the Emergencies Act, because if you have foreign interference, it's one of the grounds for invoking the Emergencies Act.
Incredible. Brian, we will hear from other organizers on how and why they get involved in the Freedom Convoy. But I have to ask you something. What surprised you the most during the week of police testimony?
How disorganized they were, how ill-prepared they were, how they weren't, Ottawa police especially. And Ottawa Police Service is what, in their parlance, they call the police service of jurisdiction. Everyone thinks, well, it's Ottawa, so it's got to be federal police. No, once you step off Parliament Hill, as I've said before, and you know this well from living there and working there, you step off Parliament Hill onto the sidewalk of Wellington Street, that's where the protests were happening. That is local Ottawa Police Service jurisdiction. All they had to do was take in any media reporting on the convoy, watch their Facebook posts, and you would have known that they were coming for a long time. Read the intelligence reports prepared by the Ontario Provincial Police. They didn't do that. They did not realize that they were coming. They did not believe that they were coming for more than 2 days. And to hear senior officer after senior officer say that, but then also see the evidence that they were warned sometimes weeks ahead of time what was actually going to happen, and that they just didn't do anything, it is quite shocking. An interesting note that came up during Chris Barber's testimony, we've heard a lot about why did they let the trucks onto Wellington Street? Because they could have allowed the protest to happen, and the trucks wouldn't have been embedded. Well, Chris Barber was talking in his testimony about how they actually thought through their discussions with police that they were going to be parking elsewhere and then going up to Parliament Hill to protest, but not necessarily with all the rigs, all the tractor trailers. They arrived and Parliament Hill was already full. These were people who were not part of the official convoy, had not traveled from Western Canada or Atlantic Canada or part of the official convoys from Southern Ontario. He said he ran into some people he knew who were just in the area doing runs and decided to join in. So by the time the official convoy hit Parliament Hill, the street was already full with rigs.
Brian, will we also hear during the testimonies of the Emergencies Act here if there were actually plants in the Freedom Convoy, you know, the Nazi flags, the Confederate flags, because a lot of the Freedom Convoy protesters we interviewed when we were in Ottawa said they were not part of the Freedom Convoy, but they were actual plants or maybe an extremist group that latched onto the Freedom Convoy. Will we hear more about that?
You know, I think that would have come out during Ottawa Police Service testimony, and I'll admit it goes from 9:30 in the morning until sometimes 6 at night or beyond, and I don't watch every single minute. But I haven't heard anything about that. I would imagine that would have come out during Ottawa Police Service testimony, and it didn't. That's not something the RCMP would talk about or deal with, and we're waiting to hear them. That they'll be sometime next week, I believe. But that could have absolutely have happened, especially with those flags in the early days. But Chris Barber, first of the organizers up, did admit that, yeah, they had all kinds of people with bad ideas trying to latch onto this. And I remember writing at the time, and I may have said it on air with you, that the convoy organizers had to be careful who was going to latch onto this, because you could see it happening. All kinds of groups with bad intentions, crazy ideas, racist ideas, or violent ideas saying, yeah, I'm going to go join that. And Barbara said, look, we had one simple goal: get rid of the cross-border mandate. And that's what we were there for. And anything else was not part of our agenda. But it didn't stop the other groups from latching on. And when you look at what Pat King said, why they shoved him out, and what he said while he was on the ground in Ottawa, he's definitely one of those guys who latched on, who you do not want anywhere near a political movement that you're trying to be successful with.
What's the latest with Ontario Premier Doug Ford being called to testify? Is he fighting that subpoena?
He is, and that was heard today in the court. So we should find out shortly on whether or not he will be forced to testify. Look, if I wrote that I think Doug Ford should go, but there are precedent reasons that he may want to fight this. He's also not key to the decision. This inquiry is not about Doug Ford and what he did. This inquiry is about, was the federal government justified in invoking the Emergencies Act? And in addition to that, and I don't think we've heard that, by the way, we haven't heard evidence to that. In fact, we've heard the opposite. But if you're going to call Doug Ford and say, well, we need to hear from him, then why aren't you calling Jason Kenney to ask him about Coots? Why aren't you calling John Horgan to ask about the blockades at the border crossings near Surrey? Why aren't you calling? I actually can't remember if it was still Brian Pallister or Heather Stevenson at that point in Manitoba to ask about what happened at Emerson. Why just Doug Ford? Is it about politics, or is it about getting to that central question of, was the federal government, not the provincial, was the federal government justified in invoking the Emergencies Act, which states you can only use it if no other law will work? And of course, we've heard testimony, and we've seen the text messages and emails from Brenda Lucki to the Chief of Staff for the Public Safety Minister saying, we have not exhausted all of our tools. Ontario's Emergencies Act gives us more tools that we haven't used yet. About 16 hours later, they invoked the Emergencies Act.
I'm glad you brought up Commissioner Brenda Lucki. During testimony from the Commissioner of the Ontario Provincial Police, we learned that RCMP Commissioner Lucki asked about using soldiers in mounted uniforms to clear out the convoy. Brian, is that even legal to do?
There's a good debate on that happening right now, and a lot of people shocked. We don't use soldiers to clear political protests in this country, and then hiding them in mounted uniforms. Thomas. So she put this to Thomas Creek, the OPP commissioner, in a text message, and he kind of walked past it without commenting too much, as in, okay, I'm going to acknowledge this is here, but I don't want to talk about this, is how I read his reply, saying but he did say that's not something he would want to do. But Lucki thought this was a good idea. Of course, we also found out that she wanted to switch her communications with the head of Ontario's provincial police to an app that would not record deleted conversations, meaning you couldn't dig them up in an inquiry. That's a request that Creek didn't even acknowledge, from my recollection, just ignored and kept discussing business with Lucki. How Brenda Lucki is still the RCMP commissioner, given what we found out in this inquiry, given what we found out from the Mass Casualty Commission in Nova Scotia, is beyond me. I wouldn't be surprised if, when this inquiry wraps, we get news that she is going to retire quietly to a rural location somewhere and leave policing altogether.
Brian, we only have a few short moments left here, but I wanted to chat with you about later this week. We'll get a look at the federal books with a mini budget or a fall economic statement. Other than confirmation of a $90 billion deficit last year, what do you expect?
I'm expecting to hear a couple of things, and you could call one of them the Pierre effect or the Poilievre effect. That's what we were calling it in the pages of the Toronto Sun. Chrystia Freeland's been making noise that the government has to rein in spending and not just end COVID pandemic support payments, but actually, if you want new spending on other measures, you've got to cut somewhere else. That's what she's been telling cabinet ministers. So I expect to hear that. I expect to hear her concerns about a recession in Canada. You know, we did run a $90 billion deficit last year. One of the more recent monthly reports, the federal government had a $10 billion surplus. That's due to inflation in part, driving up their coffers and the economy bouncing back better. But I don't think that that surplus for the federal government or the many provincial surpluses that we've seen are going to be permanent fixtures. If we end up in a recession, we know the US is in one now, a lot of concern that we're headed towards one. What will that do to the government books? And will it prompt them to spend more again? Remember, this is a government that spends more in good times and in bad. If we're heading into bad times, are they going to start priming the pump again? That will only make inflation worse. So lots to look at on November 3rd.
Political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, Hal.
As we inch closer to the longer evenings and colder temperatures of winter, our thoughts turn to family budgets and the need for an increase in home heating costs. It's almost certain that utility rates are top of mind for many, but there is a homegrown Alberta solution for this. And to talk with us more about options for less expensive electricity and natural gas, we are joined by a man who wears many hats, Trevor Lewington of Bridge Utilities in Sterling, Alberta, who's also the mayor of Sterling. Trevor, welcome back to Bridge City News. Great to have you on again.
Thanks so much for having me. Look forward to talking to you about this.
Awesome. Okay, so first off, can you maybe explain why utility rates in Alberta seem so high right now?
Yeah, there's a number of factors that are influencing utility rates. Obviously, there's some global considerations. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has destabilized global markets, creating uncertainty on the European market, which inevitably trickles over here. In Alberta, we've transitioned a number of coal-fired facilities over to renewable energy, so wind and solar, for example. And when the wind doesn't blow, of course, that creates sort of peak demands and shifts in pricing. And after the pandemic, we've seen the economy come roaring back. We've got people traveling. We've got lots of activity in the economy, and so that's actually driving demand as well. We see things like electric vehicles starting to be present on our streets, again, increasing consumption. So for the next little bit, we can definitely expect a lot of volatility in pricing. And I think, unfortunately, we're going to continue to see prices for both electricity and natural gas continue to rise.
Yeah, that is very unfortunate. And it seems almost like the cost was shifted from taxpayers to end users. So is this why we're seeing higher utility rates partially as well?
Well, so the previous NDP government had something called what they called a price cap. So it essentially limited rates to a maximum. The challenge, though, is that the people that generate the power were still actually getting paid what their costs were. So in effect, you had a fixed rate that you and I would pay as a consumer, but then there was a tax subsidy, essentially. The government was still paying those generators from just a different bank account, if you will. So at the end of the day, whether there's a price cap or not, we still end up paying for what it costs to generate the power. And so that how that shows up on our bill just changes depending on what government policy or programs in place.
Okay, and then is this change now costing the Alberta government any more or less than in the past?
Well, as you said, consumers are feeling the pain. We've seen build outs of transmission. So, the wires essentially that get the power to our businesses and our homes. We've seen the build out of infrastructure over the last couple of years. And so the companies that have built that infrastructure pass that along. We see that on our bill in transmission and distribution fees. We're seeing the impact of federal carbon taxes, for example, that show up on our natural gas bills. And so a lot of those costs get trickled down to the consumer, and we do see that on all of the various different lines that show up on our monthly bills.
Mm-hmm. What about inflation rates? Do you think that increasing utility costs are one of the reasons for that?
Yeah, certainly we're hearing from both consumers, residents as well as businesses that they're seeing increased costs both for natural gas and electricity. And ultimately, businesses are going to pass that along to consumers in the form of higher prices. There's only so much that a business can absorb while still maintaining their margins and paying their folks. And so we will likely see those costs pass through in the form of either a higher price or a surcharge. A lot of transportation companies, of course, are charging more for fuel. And so it's the same kind of idea for our utility companies.
Okay. Now, the Alberta government has been providing $50 a month for electricity and natural gas costs. So do you think that maybe there's another solution that's a best course of action for this?
Yeah, so the province acted pretty quickly, actually, by getting that energy rebate program in place, and it's now been extended to the end of the year. So on your electricity bill, if you're a homeowner or you're paying that utility bill, you will see that $50 a month. There is also some cost relief for natural gas, although that program won't kick in October. Despite the fact that we have higher prices, it's not high enough yet to trigger that program. The government's been complemented by a number of different sources for acting quickly and getting those sort of inflationary help back into the hands of consumers. Of course, there can always be improvements that are made, but the initial response, I think, has received a reasonable amount of praise for being quick and being directly on people's bills to reduce the costs out of pocket.
Okay. Trevor, can you maybe explain the government's regulated rate option?
Yeah, so the RRO, or the regulated rate option, is something that exists primarily for electricity, but it's also available for natural gas. And it's basically a guaranteed rate. So it's the default rate. So if you don't do anything, if you don't competitively look, if you just have power delivered to your house or to your business, and you never ever look at it, you will probably be on the regulated rate option. And right now, we're seeing that option very, very high. So it's ranging somewhere between 15 and 20 cents per kilowatt hour for electricity. That's an unprecedented level of price, actually. Whereas the alternative, there's many competitive energy providers out there, especially in Alberta's market. Often a fixed rate plan is much lower. And so you can see fixed rates out there on the market for typically these days starting somewhere around 9 cents per kilowatt hour. So it can be as much as half of what that regulated rate option is. But the regulated rate is guaranteed. It's out there. Any consumer can get that. No credit checks are required. But it definitely pays to shop around and see what else is available.
Okay. Well, with that said, Trevor, maybe talk to us a little bit about the concept of UtilityNet and Ridge Power.
Yeah, so UtilityNet is an Alberta company. They're based in Calgary, and they work with a number of different communities and groups like us. So the Village of Sterling formed Ridge Utilities a couple of years ago. It's a municipally owned corporation. And what we do is we market electricity, natural gas, and internet services across the province, but we're very focused in southern Alberta. And UtilityNet is the company that provides all of the infrastructure and architecture in the background to provide those services. So Ridge Utilities is one of 23 or so energy marketers in the family, and working across communities all across this province.
Okay, yeah, I know when we looked on your website there, it looked like there were many community groups delivering natural gas and electricity to Alberta communities, which is kind of cool. So what's the mission and vision of UtilityNet and your partners?
Yeah, so part of the reason we as the Village of Sterling formed Ridge Utilities was to provide ourselves with another source of revenue that was not tax generated. We all, as consumers, we all have to buy electricity and natural gas. We all need internet to do things, businesses, farms. We all need to buy those utility services. And so our theory was, why don't we buy that from a community-owned local company? There are many energy companies in Alberta, for example, that are based in the United States. So we'd much rather see those profits and those jobs actually stay here in the province instead of sending money away to another province or even to another country. And so that was our primary motivation. Most of the energy marketers that work with UtilityNet, a portion or all of the profits from those companies get reinvested back into projects in local communities. So it's a way of making sure we're giving back directly to where our customers live.
That's so neat. Okay, so how have the residents of Sterling and areas around southern Alberta like Lethbridge responded to this new idea?
Yeah, it's really been, once people, I think, understand our motivation, it's not a tax grab. It's not we're not just trying to be a rip off consumers. This is actually a competitive alternative. Our rates are very competitive to the market, and we're helping sure that those funds are reinvested back into the local community. We've had a number of other communities join us. So, for example, the town of Raymond, the town of McGrath have joined as marketing associates of us. So they're working under the Ridge Utilities banner and essentially generating revenues for themselves and ourselves as they go through that process. But we've seen very diverse groups across Alberta. So, for example, a competitor of ours, but part of the utility net family in Calgary, is a company called Sandstone Energy. And all of the proceeds from their operations get funneled back to the Calgary Public Library. So it's a way of supporting the Calgary Public Library with this energy and utility service.
Oh, that's so cool. Are people actually seeing a difference, though, on their bills, per se?
Yeah, like I said, we offer very competitive rates.
Okay.
You know, when you look across all of the different energy and service providers across the province, we're buying through UtilityNet in bulk with our partners. We're buying, a hedge several months out. So we're able to make sure we get the best possible pricing. And of course, consumers should always be looking not just at the price for the commodity itself, but also those monthly administration charges that show up on your bill. Each energy marketer sets its own administration fees, so there's an opportunity to shop competitively for that as well.
Okay, yeah, good advice there. Okay, so one group like Ridge Power recently started in Pincher Creek. So how can other groups start something similar in their communities?
Yeah, so again, there's multiple ways of doing this. The first option is to become a marketing associate. So that would be, for example, like the town of Raymond is working under the Ridge Utilities banner. Rather than having to go through the work of setting up their own municipal corporation, they can do that through us and we both share in that revenue. Or if there's a community group, a not-for-profit, a co-op, or a municipality that wants to consider setting up their own corporation, their own brand, Headwaters is the one that recently was established in Pincher Creek, for example, then they can reach out to UtilityNet. The team there is quite happy to explain the business model and see if it's a fit. It's not going to be the right solution for everyone, but it's certainly something that could be a creative solution for many groups.
Okay, so one option that customers have is the Prudential. So can you explain what this is for?
Yeah, so the way the market works in Alberta is that the generators and distributors of power, for example, the people that own the transmission lines and get it to your home, they actually get prepaid. So we have an obligation as the energy marketer to prepay what we think we're going to owe them next month. They're guaranteed that revenue essentially. And it basically protects them as the generator or distributor of energy, that if a customer defaults on their monthly bill, they're guaranteed that revenue. So we have to put up what's called a prudential or a security deposit to those companies. So what we do is we allow consumers, our customers, can choose to put a security deposit or a prudential down. And that allows us to keep our rates low, because if we're not covering the full prudential ourselves, if our customers are sharing in that, we're able to offer them a more competitive rate. So we basically have two options. You can choose a slightly higher commodity rate, a slightly higher price per kilowatt hour on your electricity, for example, with no prudential, or we can offer you an even better, more competitive rate if you're willing to put down a small prudential amount.
Okay. So one thing that's been in the news quite a little bit, we're hearing a lot about carbon dioxide lately, which of course plants use as food, but can you explain what carbon offsets are, and is this carbon the same as carbon dioxide?
Yeah, so that's a great thing about working with UtilityNet. As Ridge Utilities, we're able to offer two different programs. So one, first of all, is greening your power. So you can, for a small fee on every monthly bill, decide what percentage of your power consumption you want to get from green sources. And so that allows you to buy renewable energy credits that help encourage further investment in solar and wind projects, as an example. So you can green your power consumption. You as a consumer can help support more sustainable energy by supporting that program. There's also renewable energy credits that you can get as a micro generator. So for example, I have solar panels on my home. In the village of Sterling, we're a net zero community. We have rooftop solar units, as well as a ground mount array that generates enough electrical power to offset what we use. So we get paid for that, but we can also get credits for the fact that that is a renewable energy, and we can sell those credits on the open market. So it's fairly complex, but it's another way for people that have solar installations as a micro generator. They can maximize their return on investment for having that equipment on their home or their business.
Yeah, no, that's so interesting. So obviously you feel that there are huge advantages to installing those on, say, one's personal homes. I know it's becoming such a huge market right now.
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly use myself as the example. I haven't paid a power bill since February because I'm essentially generating my own revenue. And I probably will be able to get away with most of the winter not paying another bill because of the credits that I've saved up. And for our community, for the little village of Sterling, it's made a huge difference to be net zero. It actually is a revenue source for us. So rather than paying power bills, we're actually getting paid to generate power, which is an important thing for our residents. It keeps our budget pretty neutral.
That's absolutely incredible. Okay, so Trevor, if prices are dramatically increasing for residential customers who don't have solar panels, what's the situation like for our local businesses?
Yeah, I mean we're all feeling the pinch, right? So I think as individual customers in our own homes, we're seeing that impact on our bills. So I don't think it'll be a surprise to anyone that the local business community is also feeling that pain. So again, I think it's important that both consumers and businesses shop the market, make sure you are doing comparisons, looking for the most competitive alternative. But then there's also an opportunity for all of us to reduce our consumption, right? So energy efficient appliances, changing to LED light bulbs instead of incandescent. There are small things that we can all do that ultimately will save consumption. And if you're not using the power, then you're not paying for it. So, there's ways that we need to, I think, be creative collectively and look for ways that we can save money together.
Okay, so Trevor, there's something called the Utility Consumer Advocate. Can you maybe explain what this is? It's available to Albertans.
Yeah, so the Utility Consumer Advocate is an organization that was established and is funded by the province. And so that organization runs a website, ucahelps.alberta.ca. And it's really there to provide objective information to consumers and customers. It's not sponsored by any one particular company. It allows you, for example, to get information of what are the charges on your bill, how do you get more information. But there's also a great cost comparison tool. So you can punch in your postal code, you can identify what kind of package or rate you're looking for, and then it'll bring up all of the competitive energy companies in Alberta that offer those services, and you can kind of see for yourself and compare those side by side. So it's a great tool. There's lots of resources on energy efficiency and how bills work, and just helps people better understand the market here in Alberta.
Absolutely. That sounds very helpful, very informative. Well, Trevor, it does look like that's all the time we have for today, but thanks so much for joining us. Lots of information there. It's been great to have you on once again.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. That was Trevor Lewington of Ridge Utilities in Sterling, Alberta. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks so much for watching.